I'm sure you're aware of the paper that associates lifespans with the number of sunspots for the time period that you were being created, like maybe the 9 months you were in utero and right at your birth. There's a direct correlation that people have found with your lifespan and how many sunspots were there that year that your genetics were forming, basically, is what I gathered from it. So I start looking through this chart, started noticing a pattern of events that happened shortly after the years with the lowest sunspots. They weren't aware of these factors like magnetic fields, the position of the planets, and all of that in the way that we are now, right before we're exposed to the information field of the entire universe and the stars near us. There for a period before that, it's like they get the occult back in order. And this may be the event that they've actually been planning on. We always talk about, what is they planning for? What is it? What if it was something as simple as a magnetic alignment to decide the fate of humanity and which direction it was going?
We're getting into heavier gravitational fields, waning and depleting magnetic field on the planet, but outer gas giants are starting to line up more gravity and electromagnetism for us as we speak daily. The new thing that's come to me is it looks like the Kabbalah. I'm so shocked. Like if you go to Solar System Scope and you take off everything except to where the planets are, because there's a little settings bar on the side. You can remove the star field. You can move the planetary orbit where they actually follow around. You can remove that line, and you can take out the constellation names, and you can get it just to basically a black background with stars in it, so you can see, and then line that up in October 2024. And I swear to you, you're looking at the Kabbalah. I think that's what they would be waiting for in terms of their celestial alignment to return again. And Ransom, I would love to see that Mayan glyph or that Mayan drawing you have that they found that references 2024 end, because I want to see if there's any block walls represented in there or magnetic looping toroid fields represented in that. That most people might not look at that piece of iconography or that sculpture or whatever you would like to term it as, carving in rock, to mean that. But that's where I would look at specifically, is what representation of magnetic field canceling is in there, along with any type of electromagnetism. Serpent might be a current flow, for example. There's a lot of things that could represent the energy moving and the density of the energy. If it's just electrons, could they glow? Yeah, you might have some like glowing serpent thing. What if it's plasma? Well, it can change color. It can go to pink, to blue, to white. It can just get all over the color spectrum in there. How do you represent that on a flat piece of stone? But there has to be that there so you could see it in a second and go, that's exactly what it is, once you know what you're looking for.
I was picturing the shape of an ankh kind of whenever you were talking about, the placement of the planets there and the magnetic field it might make, but more like a three-dimensional ankh where it's a sphere, not a circle, and the middle, is like that wall you were talking about, and then the bottom would be a line. But also think about all of these big eyes on all of the stuff that kind of represents either, the inside of, the vortex, and you get to see the Z pinch in the middle of it, but think about if it was actually representing two giant spheres. Let me see if I can decipher what you said. It sounded to me like you brought up the science of noise cancellation, which if if you got some kind of noise and then you pick the right frequency, you can cancel it out where there literally is noise. And the reason I asked that's what you're saying is because if we were in that little in-between spot of the magnetic fields where they're pushing off of each other, it kind of sounds like there would be a moment of clarity where no outside forces are pushing in on your magnetic field. And then, like you said, later in the year, when you get on the other side of the sun, there would be nothing blocking the universal information from coming in. In other words, we would be protected. And it kind of makes you wonder, like, if some kind of outside of event happened, it would seem like we'd be protected for that year. But then the following year, we'd be totally exposed to not only all the cosmic rays of the universe, but also any projectiles, comets, asteroids that are out there. We would be totally unprotected except for our moon. Is that kind of what you're talking about there as far as the scenario? Not only the physical one with the planets, but the idea that you could be in a spot that's noise canceled, not noise, but it's kind of a cancellation scenario that's blocking out everything, where it would be like a moment of clarity. And then That
Complete.
happens right
Complete.
before you get to be in a position where an overload of information would be coming in from the out, being the only planet out there on that side of the sun.
Well, during this
Like
alignment where we're going to be between the sun and those four gas giants out there in the middle of these two looping fields, out in front of the sun doesn't come until, May of 2025. But if you pull it back a little bit into October of 2024, yeah, that looping field, like there would be no magnetic fields in that. So you have to think about what would be delivered in terms of a download during that time, because your brain would not know how to function. I mean, even most of us that you consider sane human beings would not be able to function, because if you're losing the magnetic orientation of how your brain moves electrical signals around it so you can think and have thoughts and do things, bodily function, whatever, move that arm. That's an electrical function that just happened because there's two different magnetic fields firing off in my brain. Now, if that all goes to zero, then you literally couldn't even think. There would be no process for you to even be aware of what was going on around you, unless it was an ethereal download that didn't involve any of the physical senses, that didn't involve your body's senses, but could be consciousness itself, far beyond the body. When we think about these downloads, even if you're in the middle of two magnetic fields from a star and four, unignited stars, the universe, the consciousness that created all of this is so much more powerful than that by so many orders of magnitude. I can't even fathom how many zeros would be behind that. Even if it's possible to think of orders of magnitude above and even quantify it in a number of how much more powerful. The consciousness that created all of this third dimensional time space that we see with star fields in front of us, like that complexity, and it's not going to be able to deliver a signal between two little magnetic fields from one little star to four little unignited stars in one little tiny solar system amongst billions of stars in our galaxy itself, 100 billion stars, and we're just one little tiny star. But yeah, what's going to be downloaded during that time? But it's going to be a specific set of circumstances with a canceling magnetic field on the human residence, on the brain, and literally everything on the planet. Like birds will experience it, reptiles will experience it, but how would the Earth experience it? Because the Earth being, take me a devil's advocate here, going to go two directions. Earth, a spinning object in space with a different polarity on the crust and the core. So just different magnetic fields, positive, negative. Crust is negative and they discharge sometimes or absorb charge, change charges. And that crust, the reason it's locked in and we don't really spin around on it too much is because it's magnetically locked to layers deeper down in the crust or down into the core for the rest of the planet. If there's no magnetic field, those don't lock anymore. So everything just kind of does its gingerly loop. That's on the planetary side. And then all of a sudden, whoosh, it goes back in. Everything locks back in like a trillionth of a second. Whoosh, that magnetic field locks again. And then everything restarts itself, but it's been refreshed. As I could exactly see, because I talked to Robert Felix at length about this. Like, where do these evolutionary leaps come from? And that very well could be another one, triggered by the cosmic rays and the zero magnetic field and the block wall. And there's different things that go on sometimes that create a huge amount of movement, like the earthquake in Japan. We learned about plate tectonics. Things are supposed to move like a millimeter per year. That's all the continents are supposed to move at. And then we had the Fukushima quake, and the entire island chain moved 8 feet. There's these orders of magnitude above kind of events that happen that cause huge shifts. And that's exactly what that block wall is one of these events. I don't know if it's the elite trying to cause as much scatterbrainness going into this magnetic field canceling wall to get a different outcome versus if we went into it with love. Like, the year 2000, man, I was so disappointed. 1999, they had the scare, the Y2K thing, and then there were like people putting suitcases and briefcases to go off at midnight or something in like Central Park. Don't enjoy yourself. It could have been the happiest party on the planet. The euphoria could have been so, like, you would have vibrated out of your skin with just the excitement and the love around. If it would have gone that direction, you literally would have left your body in a consciousness state. That physical form would have been left there, but you would have been vibrating in a different way. And I tell you, that's exactly what they stopped. And when I say they, I'm talking the same nefarious players that are trying to control society and move it in directions from the central banks to the Bank for International Settlements, all these Bilderberger Group, everything you're hearing about with the Klaus Schwab reset, and all these politicians bought and paid for implementing policy dictated by, and who knows what it is, an entity that they're worshiping. I don't know, it gets a little bizarre sometimes, but I'm just curious if we're getting specifically stuck in like a staticky, clingy, weird, icky vibration to be pushed into this magnetic field versus going in it with pure love and light and everybody bonding together, entering this magnetic field, canceling state for just a moment. What happens when you come out of it? Is everybody truly reset, or is it like the state you go in with, something happens with that? It either amplifies or decreases or whatever, but there's an outcome out the backside of that. I don't know, Ransom. I'm done rambling. I'm confused.
You know, confusion makes a lot of sense to me. And actually, what you were just saying there made a lot of sense because, you know, there's a saying, party like it's 1999. And there's a reason for that. It's people did party and have a good time. Some people went off the deep end, but the vast majority of the population was having a good time. And what happened? How did the government react to that? They gave us 9/11 a couple years later. But think about this also. I didn't even say download when I was talking, but that's exactly the idea that I was thinking about. It looks like for a period in 2024, you would be blocked off from the universe as far as a magnetic situation. And that would give the powers that be an absolute opportunity to hijack and control the message. Also, anytime in the past that this ever happened, the general population didn't have the power, know-how, knowledge, access to even know that it might possibly be happening for them to sit and think about it for a second before it happened, like we're doing now. They weren't aware of these factors like magnetic fields, the position of the planets, and all of that in the way that we are now. It's possible 50,000 years ago they were. They seem to have learned stuff. But think about that for just a second. Right before we're exposed to the information field of the entire universe, the galaxy, you know, in the short area, and the stars near us, all of these different messages coming out from different stars are available to us on some kind of level. But there for a period before that, it's like they get the occult back in order. And this may be the event that they've actually been planning on. We always talk about, what is they planning for? What is it? What if it was something as simple as a magnetic alignment to decide the fate of humanity and which direction it was going? If they could control these downloads, and is it possible that people get downloads, but they also give away uploads? And the fact that maybe in a certain circumstances, people can actually download from each other. And it seems like we do that constantly whenever I say one thing and then you say what I was thinking about, and then it just goes in a fluid conversation. And I don't know about you, but I rarely ever prepare for this show. So I don't even know what we're going to be talking about most of the time.
Me either. It's just a go with it. And I can't explain it either, but, you know, we do follow each other's thoughts pretty cleanly on that. At least it seems to me that as the magnetic field changes, the perception of humans changes as well. And perhaps that's the reason for more distraction, because if you're able to view and see more with your eyes, ears, would you not have to distract away from what you're seeing, or sixth sensibility, something growing inside that you're able to see through the illusions? Whatever it is that gives that clue away that it's an illusion. These abilities are enhancing and increasing as the magnetic field's declining. I was saying this many, many years ago. They're going to need to change the way they structure governments around the world because the new frequency brought on by that declining magnetic field. Humans are going to vibrate faster. We're already in a different kind of medium, if you will. It's a faster vibrating medium, and you can almost feel it, that things are moving faster because they're in a magnetic vibrating field. And that was also shown by, well, you go back to with the Mayans and coming up with Aquarius and this whole era of time from, say, 2012, which could have been a misinterpretation also. We don't know exactly. But you can't tell me within 2012 to 2020, 21, in this 10-year period, out of at least 2,000 to 3,000 years of forecasting in the future, they all hit it on the head. All belief systems, prophecy, everything talked about from supposedly disconnected continents, they all pinned to these couple of years right here, and we're experiencing this right now.
It's a real curious thing, because when in the past has people actually sat around and thought about magnetic fields as being, or even electricity? And I wanted to point out, almost forgot that you sent me that thing on Telegram, but while we still have enough time, about the sheep dying. And you remember when we were talking about that, when it was unknown what killed the cattle, and you were talking about you really thought it was something from the atmosphere, above the atmosphere, and then it turns out, verified on another thing I was looking at, there indeed was some sprouts up above that area. So there was some kind of electromagnetic phenomenon. And I remember at the time I was talking about, the only time I've ever seen that was lightning. That's the only time
Yeah,
I've
it was
ever
those
seen.
halo sprites that look like a double-headed eagle in the sky. Is that the same one? Like, that's crazy.
That's right. And that was right over that area. So we were right on the money of what that was. And it wasn't heat. I didn't get to play this thing for them because I couldn't turn off the sound. But what's the deal with these sheep?
Same thing. It was a tear in the electromagnetic field that allowed that radiation to bombard them. But they were higher up in the elevation. And what's interesting is the Egyptians have the same stories, is where, you know, the mountaintops fried and anybody there was like cooked into a microwave oven. Well, that's UVB or UVC radiation. But then at the same time, those on the shorelines were inundated by 1,200-foot tall waves. We're talking cataclysmic events, but a tear in the magnetic field at this point would send UVB down to probably ground level. And this is, especially of the sheep, where they're at 3,000, 5,000 feet. You'd have to also look at the grasses and things to see if it was scarred or some sort of beyond what the animal deaths were. Is anybody taking a look at the plant life around there? Insect life, amphibian life, to see if it was also affected by the increase in radiation that seems to be taking these animals out, or electrified fields intensifying? Would there be a different magnetic resonance? Because, you know, when they go into crop circles, sometimes they find different, like, energetic fields and magnetic disturbances in there. Is anybody walking around with any types of the magnetometer to see if the magnetic field's different from the, you know, a few steps away? They seem to be related. And, you know, to see a double-headed eagle in the sky above that event, it's a little too quirky that, you know, some of these elitist families that we've been referencing through here that still have control after thousands of years are the double-headed eagle. So did they see a plasma display in the sky and took that reference as their coat of arms? Because that double-headed eagle, that's really difficult to dismiss that one. And imagine if it goes orders of magnitude above, it would take the same shape, but it'd be more precise on where the beaks are. And however far out that plasma filament goes and starts, you know, at the tendril at the end, and then out of those beaks came some sort of flashing thing, which would look like a serpent tongue or something like this. And let that dance around in the sky for a while, and then put it so big that an entire continent sees it or the entire planet sees it, and then try to describe it. Aside from that, nature's doing its own thing. But see, you get into this feedback loop where the spirituality and people's intuitive sixth sense, or just the way they perceive reality, is changing because the electromagnetic field of the planet's changing. But that's changing the jet streams and cloud cells and creating different flows in what you consider weather or quote unquote climate. And then that in turn affects the food production. But all these three things are happening simultaneously: the destruction of what you consider civilization, including the food supply, and then going up. And then how are people spiritually supposed to handle this shattering of reality around them, of things that used to be stable? You know, I've been really talking about electromagnetic field on the planet, and here we got this incredible blue jet blowing out the top of a cloud. And that's one of the biggest ones I've ever seen. It actually looks like the purple, the way it hazes off into the end, is connecting to an electromagnetic field line from the sun directly now. So, you know, you go back through the petroglyphs and different amazing rock artwork on canyon walls. I mean, if that was to go out and amplify, that would glow in the sky, and you would definitely see that on the wall of a canyon somewhere, referencing what we're looking at here. So, I mean, all this is in real time playing out, and then suddenly the Great Reset's here, and you can see how everything is dovetailing and overlapping at once. But see, that's subset A of information. Then what's next, you know?
Kind of back to where I was going with this sacred geometry in the Vedic astrology of that date that you picked out, 2024, because of the planet's alignment. And it kind of led me to this other thing, and I'm sure you're aware of the paper that associates lifespans with the number of sunspots for the time period that you were being created, like maybe the 9 months you were in utero and right at your birth. There's a direct correlation that people have found with your lifespan and how many sunspots were there that year that your genetics were forming, basically, is what I gathered from it. So I start looking through this chart, started noticing a pattern of events that happened shortly after the years with the lowest sunspots. I'm sure you know that in 2019, 2020, there were really small number of sunspots. If you were to add the idea in that all the babies born between 2019 and 2020, 2021, right in there, those are going to be some seriously long lifespan children. But I decided to go back in time. My grandma was born in 1933. So you can go on this graph right here that shows you the maxes and the minimums of the sun. If you were born in 1912, there was only 3.6, what they're putting for the number as sunspots. And in 1913, 1.4. And in 1914, 9.6. So you can see that they're really low. But then in the next couple of years, by 1917, there's a solar max and you get 103 sunspots. And if you know what's going on at that time, we're talking about World War I, all kinds of stuff. So skip forward to before World War II. Let me find 33 here. Here it is. So 1932, there's only 11. In 1933, there's only 5. They put 5.6. So the mid-30s here, let's say 1931 to 1936, and remember all these kids that are being born in this time, what happens right after that is World War II. So a big reduction in population there. And this seems to be the pattern overall, that every time that there's years where children are born that are probably going to live an extended lifespan, there's some kind of big population reduction right afterwards. So 2019 and 2020 would be no different because there wasn't that many sunspots. So most of the children that were being born are going to live a long time. These are the kids that are going to grow the longest if they don't die from what's going on in the world. And then think about that. Famine, there's war, and we're going into another one of these little mini cycles that follows no sunspots or very little sunspots. And I kind of wanted to get your take on that because we talk a lot about these giant cycles and how long have the elite or whoever's been running the planet actually been in control of the events on Earth. But if they knew this kind of information, you could plan when your children are born and how long they're going to live. But not only that, you could plan in when your great-grandchildren are born. And think about this. What if some of the people on Earth only mated with other people that were born in their age range and they waited to have children to these time periods, and then each generation is only the one with the least amount of sunspots? You would see that there would be different effects happening to one group versus the other group. So like if you were born, let's say at 1947, there was 151 sunspots and that person probably died in their late 40s or 50s. A lot of the people did. And my dad actually fits into this right here. He was born in 1949, 134 sunspots. He made it to about 50. And then I look at my grandma, like I said, 1933, and there's almost none. And she just recently died at 90 from a stroke. But I wanted you to like chime in on this because we talk about energy. And once you see this pattern here, you realize that they know about it. If you can know about it, they know about it. And they're plotting when to make the worst and the best times for people. And it seems like the people with the shortest lifespans are the people that grow up, you know, in this bubble in between the ones that grow a long time. But every time there's a little amount of sunspots, there's some really traumatic things worldwide that would reduce the population immediately to counteract the fact that the kids all born in that time period, if they weren't messed with, would live a long and probably productive life.
Yeah, I sent you a couple graphics of the solar system scope as you were talking about energies in the heavens, diagrams or the rotation orbits where they sit on those dates, but also my alignment that I keep calling that looks really like the Kabbalah is October 23rd, 2024. You know, these Uranus, Jupiter, Saturn, and Neptune are making a square in the outer solar system. These 4 mega planets are going to make their own slight new magnetic field out there, interlooping in a toroid wave. But then our sun is definitely going to connect electromagnetically to those out there. You got to be kidding me. There's almost a 2,000-year event we're going to see with the electromagnetism. So being born into what you just spoke of, now we need to take something in physics called a block wall. If you have a looping toroid magnetic field on the right and you have a looping toroid magnetic field on the left and they're separate, think about magnets on the table, and then you get them close enough where they start to tug, and then you bring that 3D again and you got that looping toroid. Well, those fields are going to overlap somewhere. And where the overlapping center point is, there's a place of zero magnetism, and it's called the block wall. And I really believe the Earth is going to go through that block wall for however long it is, whether it be seconds, minutes, or hours, in October of 2024. So if you're talking about magnetic field, even at a low magnetic field to be born, what if you could be born right for those seconds or hours when the Earth was passing through the block wall with zero magnetic field? You'd live to be like 10,000 years old. That's all coming right now, October 2024. So that's kind of my answer to you. Imagine if you could be born in the block wall and then see what would happen from there.
Yeah, I'm so fascinated with these charts and stuff that I imagine that if you got all the charts from different topics, sunspots, flares, all of the ice age data for the planet, and you kept lining these all up, that you would just see that all of them are on the same wave pattern. And if the elites, I'm just going out there, if they knew about this and they could plan for it, or they had some way of detecting when things would be, like maybe the last 26,000 years or before that, they already have seen these cycles go through. Somebody was keeping track of the solar system that long. So that means that they would know when these energetic events happen, when to plan everything from war to population growth or decrease. And if you just think about it, if these elite families actually knew that, they'd be like, well, we're not going to have a kid until 1963 or something, and they would make sure that their children were born on low sunspot years versus the populace has no idea that this even exists because they're convincing them that everything that they're doing and their lifestyle is what's causing their lifespan, when it seems to be that your genetics are directly related to the sun's output or lack thereof. And if that's true, then obviously we're talking about a galactic energy form that everything runs off of.